Welcome to Muslim Apologetics Australia. This is a quick video response to Daniel Haqiqatjou's critics who would like to constantly accuse him of being somewhat hypocritical for living in the West and benefiting from the West and living and taking advantage of Western technology and advancements. At the same time, he criticizes the West. And some of these liberal Muslims feel that this is hypocritical, that Daniel isn't moving to a Muslim country if he really hates the West so much. And so it's hypocritical for him to speak against Western education when, for example, his wife and himself have been students of Western education who have earned academia through Western education. So how can he therefore criticize Western education? How can he therefore live amongst Western education? Why doesn't he just pack up his bags and move to a Muslim country if he so hates the West so much? So this is basically their argument. Therefore, Daniel, they say, as from a Muslim perspective, should not be using, Islam and criticizing the West when he's living in the West and he's, benefiting from the West. Now, this argument can be used against the liberal Muslims who appeal to the West for one reason. Why do liberal Muslims, for example, speak and partition against some of the things that they see bad in the West, whether it be human rights abuses, whether it be racial vilification abuses, whether it's against, against immigration, where they stand up against certain politicians. So why don't all of these people, if they so hate the West because there's so much racism and Islamophobia and all that sort of stuff, why do they keep accusing the West of Islamophobia and hating the West for holding on to these grudges against Muslims? So why then they, on the same standard, why don't they pack up their bags and leave and go back to a Muslim country? Surely, if Daniel should be forbidden to speak against the West because he lives in the West, then you should also be forbidden to protest against the West because some of your Muslim rights and so forth are getting taken away from you. So you can correct the West, you can protest against the West, you can stick up for your own human rights and protest and criticize the West for being Islamophobic or for being racist or for being white nationalists. You can criticize them and at the same time live in the West, but Daniel can't. Daniel must go back to a Muslim country because he's a hypocrite if he doesn't. But you can stay here and criticize the West. That's fine. The same liberal Muslims would criticize the government for not sticking up to homosexual rights, for not sticking up to LGBT rights, for not sticking up for and supporting the right for marriage in the LGBTI community. Right? You petitioned and you demanded change. You vowed against the secular liberal state that wasn't giving these rights. And eventually you protest, you condemned the West, and eventually they got their rights. But Daniel can't criticize the West. No, he can't. He can't talk about all of these bad things and at the same time live here. But you can. And here's another point. A lot of these liberal Muslims would say Daniel shouldn't be criticizing us, our Islam and our way of life, the way we live Islam in this country. I can be a feminist Muslim, I could be a non-hijabi Muslim, I could be this, I could be that. Daniel shouldn't be, imposing his Wahhabism on me and telling me what Islam is and what Islam isn't. And, if Daniel really wants to live by Islam, then he should go to a Sharia country and he should go live there. He shouldn't be telling me what to do. But here is the thing, right? Here is the thing. This is where the double standard is. Suppose Daniel did go live in one of those Muslim countries, and if Daniel then started sending his condemnation to those liberal Muslims, saying that they need to correct their deen, they need to come back to Islam, and they need to follow Islam in this way, those same critics would say, oh, Daniel doesn't live amongst us. If Daniel lived in the West, he'd understand our circumstance, he'd understand our situation, he'd understand the challenges we're going through. But because Daniel lives in a Sharia country and lives in the Middle East, he can't understand what we're going through. He can't understand our situation. Therefore, how can Daniel be making these sorts of judgments upon our Islam where he doesn't know what we go through and our daily challenges? Therefore, Daniel is in no position to speak against our Islam and make fiqh issues and fatwas based on our situation. If Daniel really wants to know our situation, maybe he should come here to the West and live amongst us and then judge us based on our own circumstances, because only then he will know what our challenges are. Right? See the irony? So whether Daniel stays in the West and criticize you, you'll still, use arguments and criticize him. If Daniel moves to the Muslim country, you're still criticizing him, right? So it's like a double-edged sword. And we know that these liberalists use that argument. For example, they'll say, oh, we only believe in our modern day scholars, our Western scholars, Islamic scholars, people like Yasir Qadhi. We appeal to him because, he knows our situation more, because he understands what we're going through in our modern day challenges, right? And therefore, we shouldn't be listening to scholars in Saudi Arabia. We shouldn't listen to those Wahhabis who don't know our challenges, who know our, what we're going through, right? So they do make those arguments. So Daniel, if he's living in the West, he can't criticize them because he lives in the West. But if he lives in a Muslim country or a Sharia country, he still can't criticize them because now he doesn't know their current challenges and situations. So this is their way of making excuses in order to shut criticism. Try to paint him as a hypocrite for living in the West, and at the same time, if he goes to live in a Muslim country, then you'll say, well, we can't accept what he's saying because he doesn't know our situation. So either way, they're trying to shut down criticism. So according to these secular liberalist Muslims, if you live in the West, you're not allowed to criticize. But being part of democracy is part of criticism, isn't it? I mean, that's why we have politicians arguing back and forth about human values and should we support this and should we support that? What is bad? What is good? This is all part of parliamentary inquiry and argument and debate. But apparently if you're a Muslim, no, you have to move to another country. You can't argue for debate. But didn't the Islamic teachings say you can go to a foreign nation and you can call people to Islam? Well, can't you do that? So they're themselves against the principle of Islam by going to the West to call people to Islam. So in fact, according to Islamic principles, Daniel has got more legitimacy to live in the West than you do, because most of you secular liberalists that constantly complain about Daniel, you rarely even do dawah to your non-Muslim friends. In fact, You are embarrassed to give them dawah. You're embarrassed to talk about Allah and the Prophet Muhammad and invite these people to Islam. You're embarrassed, right? Because you don't want to criticize their gods, right? So when you actually look at it, the fact that you spend very little time doing dawah, in fact, none possibly, in fact, it is you who shouldn't be living in the West under Islamic jurisdiction, under the Quranic, under the Hadith commandment. You should not be living in the West. In fact, you're the least person that should be living in the West because you don't do dawah. And of course, they'll make the excuses, oh, but we're running away from oppression. Well, you can go to other Muslim countries. You can go to Indonesia. Where's the oppression there? You can pick a handful of other countries. You could go to Turkey. You could go to Saudi Arabia. Just like a lot of other foreign people from India who go to Dubai, for example, for work and economic reasons. At least you'll be in a more predominantly Muslim environment, which is probably more beneficial for you. So Daniel probably has more better reasons to stay here in the West, because he's actually lecturing the West and he's showing Muslims how to be real Muslims, how to be true Muslims, how he's trying to bring the lost Muslims back to Islam who are living in the West, something that you do not do, something that you pay no attention to, including calling your non-Muslim friends to Islam. And here's another irony. These same hypocritical people, these secular liberal Muslims, they would never, ever, ever tell any campaigner, any secular liberal feminist campaigner who is either living in Saudi, who is living in Pakistan, who is living in Turkey, or who is living in Afghanistan, to leave their work in spreading secular democracy, liberalism and feminism into those Muslim countries. Never would they say, leave your work and come and live with us in the West. No, they would in fact fund those individuals to remain in those Muslim countries, to spread the ideology of secularism and liberalism, even though those countries are predominantly Muslim or predominantly conservative and Sharia bound. And what they do is they send these particular individuals, they support them so they can go to those Muslim countries so they can change their way of life. Never once any of them complain and say those secular liberalists, if they hate Sharia so much, why don't they just leave those Muslim countries and come and live with us? No, in fact, it's the opposite. They say, please remain there. Please stay there. Try and change the situation of those people, right? Bring them to secular liberalism. Bring them to enlightenment, as they call it. So now, as we speak, they have those groups now in Afghanistan, and they're telling them, we'll support you, we'll donate to you, we'll fund you, remain there so you can change the nature of people. And this is backed by millions of dollars, US backed dollars, right? So they're benefiting from these dollars. They're benefiting from the money that's being poured through wars to live in those countries. They probably live in their own little palaces and mansions while they go out and try and spread feminism and democracy and liberalism and secularism into those countries. None of them say, oh, you should stop benefiting from all this war profit and all this money. Now you should come back and live in the West if you really hate, that country, if you hate Sharia. Stop being a hypocrite, stop staying there. You should come back to the West. No, they never say that. They say, stay there, do the work you're doing, and we're going to support you in this. But if we support Daniel for staying in the West, keep promoting, keep voicing it out, keep, doing what you're doing in that country, send the dawah of conservative Islam into that country, push it, show them where they're wrong. No. Now they don't like it. So, as they say, Don't do what you don't like for yourself then. Get rid of all your feminists and secularists out of those Muslim countries. Call them all back to the West. Say, come and live with us. No, you won't do that because your objective is to spread secular liberal democracy and your kufr into those countries. But Daniel, how dare he try and enlighten people? How dare he try and bring people back to the Sharia belief system? How dare he call people back to conservative Islam? And then being a hypocrite, trying to label him of hypocrisy for living in the West and benefiting from it, as you say.